Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Semantic Kernel Public Community Office Hours. Always have to emphasize public because it's a public forum. Uh, glad that everyone's here. We actually have a very packed agenda for the slide. Lots of questions got submitted. We probably won't get to all of them. So disclaimer, if you've submitted your question, we see them. We will get to them, if not today, a future session. But first off, some announcements. So yesterday actually was the kickoff of the APAC community office hours. So completely run by the cloud solution architect team and solutions team in that region. So it was very good, actually. It was pretty well attended. And yeah, they gave intro to SK as well as I think showed off a little bit of a demo. And so if you have people, friends or colleagues who are in that region and want to have a office hour that's more friendly to their time zone, definitely point them to that one. And the recordings for that will also be published. Okay, so other announcements is we have a new blog post. So we mentioned prompt flow actually before. I forget how long ago, but we are going to be publishing some more of this. So expect this to be a series. Prompt flow is one of the other tools inside the Azure AI platform to the short version of that is it helps you both visually see the prompts as well as experiment which prompts and the flows or the chains that you are putting together, how they perform and how you can evaluate them so that you can make the best decision for your end application. So semantic kernel and prompt flow, right? Not meant to be infused with one another. They're actually meant to harmonize quite well. So definitely check out this blog post to read more. So last week we had Teresa and Tao actually give some very good updates and demos of what's inside Chat Copilot, as well as even showing off semantic memory. So if you missed that, definitely check out I clipped out those sections so you can see which one is most relevant to you. But yeah, it's good content, and definitely encourage you all to follow along what's happening. Okay, before we go into questions, we have Niels, who has a demo that he'd like to show off and get some feedback from. So, Niels, I'm going to hand to you to do that.
Awesome, thank you. Hello, everybody. This is I just got started with Semantic Kernel, so I'm kind of new in this world. I work for Assembly AI, and so us as a company, we use a lot of AI to provide the best transcription services there are. So my goal was here to integrate that essentially into Semantic Kernel, so we could plug it into planners and whatever could be necessary by Semantic Kernel users. So let me share my screen. There we go. So I have a sample project here open, and let me just focus on the specific, the relevant pieces. So we have the transcript plugin here, and I added like a boolean to make sure that by default it wouldn't be able to access the file system, but I enabled that here so I can, and that's just because sometimes the audio files might be locally stored, and so we do want to support that uploading those files. But by default, we expect people to pass in URLs like you can see here. Let me just so here is an example of how you would use the plugin. So you create you get the transcript plugin function for transcribe. You invoke it with the variables, which is the audio URL.
Niels, can we zoom in a little bit more?
Oh yeah, sure. There we go. So normally we have like a lot more options, but I just wanted to get the most basic functionality ready and to demonstrate. And so the result of that would be the transcript itself. Now I have a second function as well, which uses the planner. Same thing, except I'm not explicitly telling it to use the plugin. It's instead figuring out using the plugin descriptions which plugin to use. I also added like a different plugin that kind of figures out, hey, I said downloads folder, so it's gonna like generate the common file path for the current operating system, and then try to find the file and upload it. So let me run that. This is gonna take a little bit, so maybe I should have just start running it and then start talking. Now I also submitted some questions. I don't know if we'll get to that later, but they're essentially related to developing this plugin.
And you're calling an external service, right? Through API key.
Yeah, it's an API.
It's not a local service.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
No, it's not a local service. So we have the results from the first method, which is this transcript. And then here you can see how the plan is figuring out how to use the common folder name, pass in the file name, and then so this is that our plugin I was talking about, find files in common folders, and that passing that into the audio URL parameter for the transcript plugin, and the results of that should also be the transcript. Now I had a different sample, but it was getting too complicated, so I didn't want to add that in where I should do like Q&A on top of this, but that was like getting too far away from the plugin itself. All right. Is there anything else that you would like me to show from this, or is that good?
This is very cool. No, I like it. I like that it works.
Yeah. Well, I had some questions, but I think I linked to that. So instead of continuing to share the demo, maybe we can just get to the questions.
Yes. Do you want to share? Do you have those questions up, or do you want me?
Oh yeah, actually, let's see. I have to stop sharing and then start sharing again because I'm sharing the specific window.
And of course, anyone in the chat or in the community, feel free to come off mute, raise your hand if you want to give Niels feedback on this plugin.
Yeah, so the first question I had was like, how should we throw exceptions? Should we catch our exceptions and then return the error message as a string? So like a planner could parse it and then see if they can continue, or what's like the best approach? Should the semantic kernel framework itself take care of it?
Great question. Doug, go ahead.
If it's an exception, it should throw it. I mean, I'm almost positive that in a system I'm building, one of the first things I'm going to do is jettison most of Planner outside of the core feature set and use durable task library, right, for retries and all that stuff. So I need it to be transparent and not deal with, attempt to deal with it itself and hide what's happening on the inside to be able to compensate.
All right.
I don't know if other people agree with that, but that's my take.
Yeah, it seems like behind the scenes, there's been quite a few PRs the last couple of weeks, normalizing how exceptions get thrown, and they're all following the .NET standard practice now. It's way less like SK specific stuff, like storing that exception in like a last exception property and not throwing. And it's more like throw it and let your, catch handler take care of it.
So these should just be whatever exception it is. It shouldn't be wrapped in like a specific exception provided by SK.
No, it should be a real exception so that
Okay.
you can only ambiguously identify what it was, but it shouldn't handle it. Or if it does handle it, it should still throw it.
Yeah, I think there's a dedicated decision record for this. I'll try to find it and throw it in the chat because I think this was all discussed by the SK team.
Awesome.
I was wondering if you guys ever consider using a result structure to return back the thing so you can see success or not. That would be, it's a clean way in my opinion, but how I was thinking about it.
So I see Teresa is actually on the call. I'd be curious from the Chat Copilot perspective how team handles this.
So this is actually something we're trying to figure out right now too. We just had to change one of our error handlers to catch a generic exception. So I don't have a straightforward answer to this, but we are talking about it. Chris is thinking about it, so I'll tag him in the chat and ask him what his initial thoughts are.
Isaac, I see your hand up.
Okay.
Yeah, so I wanted to maybe share what we did to give you an idea. We did go down the route of returning a result initially, but what we found is that standardizing things to exceptions made it easier to catch the exceptions and specifically their types. And even within the exceptions, because we're using an implementation of Semantic Kernel in Python, within the exceptions, there was information on why specifically, obviously, the exception occurred. So just at the base level, when we're calling that function that does everything, we had a catch, and then we could just very cleanly in one area have exceptions that are typed instead of returning a result. And so I'm personally a proponent for throwing exceptions and catching them. That's all.
Yeah, hopefully that's helpful, Niels. But yeah, from the SK side, we will at least share some examples. I think Teresa and Chris and the Chat Copilot team can show how they're handling it in a future session. So, or at least a future PR.
Yeah, I think right now we're pretty much following the same practice that was just described. I don't know who was talking, but where we're throwing the exception and then we're parsing a specific error message to handle different cases.
Cool. But good question.
Thank you. All right. So next one is like, what would the best way be to pass the API key to a plugin? Right now, I'm passing it through the constructor, but would it be recommended to like pass it through a parameter, or what you're thinking on this?
Yeah, good question. What do people in the communities think?
I currently pass mine through a constructor. I just think it's pretty standard, and then save it to a private variable. So, yeah.
Is there like a dependency injection system that Semantic Kernel supports, or would it be preferred to like integrate it with .NET standard dependency injection system?
This is where I don't know if Teresa has the answer.
So for Chat Copilot, what we do is I can send you some links to this. Is we have different authentication provider classes that basically wrap around the token, and it's called as the auth callback whenever whatever function within that plugin is invoked. So I can send you that to show you an example of how we do it in Chat Copilot.
Yeah, that sounds good. I just want to make sure if I provide a plugin to the ecosystem that it's following, the way that it's expected to be done.
Yeah, there is an auth callback parameter with every time you register a plugin, so we would recommend that way.
Awesome. Yeah, I was wondering this, like how would you use a semantic functions within a native function, because from one native function, I would like to call a semantic function. But like, is there like right now I could do it by passing in the kernel and then creating like a template and function and registering the function, but then it's also like registered with the kernel, but I don't really want to expose it outside of my native function. I just want it to, like, to be private essentially. Is there like a way to do that?
So I'll give
Yeah.
a thought.
I have a, sorry, Alex. Yeah.
No, I'll give a quick thought. I don't know if it's the right thought, but I think you can, instantiate many versions of multiple instances of the kernel, right? Even inside a function, if you really wanted to. So that scope, right, that function scope could just have that kernel and not be the, what I call it, meta kernel that you're working with. So that's one option, one way.
So you could like make a copy of this kernel, use it, and then yeah.
I don't know if copy is the right word. Maybe just instantiate a brand new one.
Well, so because I'm providing this as a plugin, so I don't really want to decide how the kernel is configured. I want that to be the responsibility of the consumer.
I see.
Would you just dependency inject iKernel into your function, and assuming you set it up as scoped, it should just use the same kernel in your function?
Yeah, but I don't want to register the function into it because I only want it to be private to me. Because when I did register like this function into the kernel, it started being used inside of the sequential planner and whatnot, and would start messing up the results there.
Yeah, I've also kind of run into a similar issue. Like the kernel exposes the prompt template engine, right? And it makes creating these semantic functions inline pretty nice. But yeah, kind of like you're saying, it gets then picked up by the planner and stuff like that. I don't know if this works because I haven't finished it yet, but if I remember correctly, there was some example and there's a way to actually create your own skill collection to pass to the kernel. I'm not sure if that got refactored because there's been a lot of refactorings going on. But you could build the kernel, tell it to use its own skill collection, add the semantic function just to that new skill collection, and then once you return from the method, it's out of scope. I'll have to look at that.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you.
I also did a workaround where I split the native function into two. So you had the before, the semantic, then the after. I mean, that's something that I did as a workaround before.
Yeah, the planner also has support for excluded functions, so you can pass in a list of functions that you want excluded from the planner.
I see, yeah.
I know there's a lot of feedback y'all are getting on this, but I mean, I think until you finish the work and get function calling in, everything around planner as it exists now is suspect. That's my hot take. I mean, I'm avoiding it as much as I can. You have a big problem. The feature came out from OpenAI in June. It's almost October. You're still thinking about it. You need to like pick an approach, and then if it breaks us later on, that's fine. But planner without function calling against OpenAI, I don't get the rationale why anybody would do that.
Very fair, very fair. And yeah, I mean, I've said before that it's on its way. There was a way to bring it in sooner, but I think the team has wanted to, I guess, go a couple more rounds in terms of architecture. So,
I mean,
yeah.
My feedback is if you want people to use Semantic Kernel come December, you need to get it done.
Oh yeah. All these
a big problem.
All these top priority things should be in by Ignite time actually.
Okay, cool.
And actually, I mean, I'm not gonna definitively say it, but we are marching towards the 1.0 release also, which is the biggest thing actually. That's why you're seeing a lot of changes happening inside the kernel. So that if all the stars align, right, that'll also
Yeah.
be by ignite time.
I'm using a pull request. I'll stop talking here because I didn't raise my hand, but I'm using a pull request that's on the PR, the one from Kevin. It doesn't have his last name, so I don't know. KevDome 3000 has a fork, and I was like very close to doing basically the same design, and then saw it, and I was like, oh, this is way better than what I could have come up with, and the amount of time I'd allocated to it. Just if you haven't looked at it deeply, I suggest you do because it works pretty nicely. Yeah. I was hoping that person would be on the call so I could find out whose name it was and actually thank him. It's really nice.
Niels, any other questions from this or?
No, but I did want to turn this around and say, like, give this as feedback. It would be cool if we could have semantic functions kind of side by side inside of a plugin like this. So, like, instead of having to register it, just have it using attributes, or like be able to return the config, and then when a consumer registers the plugin, then the semantic functions and the native functions would kind of be registered in one way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's good feedback. I'll definitely pass it to the team.
Awesome, thank you.
Cool. Well, thank you, Niels, for showing off the demo. And for other people who want to show off demos or give live feedback, yeah, just fill out the form attached to the event, and I can allocate time to show that off. Okay, so back to our regularly scheduled programming. As mentioned, we have lots of questions. Probably won't get through all of them, but we'll try. Okay, so Alessandro, this is from actually last week. It's to save the time of reading through all this, I'll have it on the slide. Maybe, Alessandro, do you want to just describe it?
Yes. So my questions were, this one about recording memory record is basically about the data that we store with the vectors. I'm looking at Redis, I was seeing what's stored, right? I was wondering if there is any suggestions on what those tags or whatever are supposed to be used as, because, for instance, I would like to do things like filter the post of last year out, or some pre-filtering before I look at the whole set, right? So basically a question like that. What do we put in the metadata that we store with the vector? This is what this question is about. And this first one, yeah.
Yeah. Do people on the call have any suggestions on this? So this is where I wish Devis or someone who more closely is working with memory would be on the call. Yeah, in terms of what specifically to put inside memory records and in terms of additional metadata, like I don't remember if we currently support the hybrid type searching as opposed to vector searching.
Yeah, it doesn't
as
look
opposed
like.
to just
I've seen a memory filter. You can use tags. So, for instance, the user tag is one that I've seen in semantic memory, at least. So, I mean, basically things like this: ER of the comment, or the user, or the organization. So you can pre-filter the blocks and then do the semantic search on top of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think put the tags that are relevant for the type of queries you're doing. If it's like date time queries, I guess there's one thing. If it's just literally keywords, then yeah, include those as well. Yeah, I
tag as much as you can, kind of.
Tag as much as you can. That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That kind of answers this. The remaining questions, I believe, they're related to paging. Okay, so we get a limit in semantic kernel and semantic memory, but we don't have a skip or anything equivalent to the skip. So my question is, how can we do paging, or should we look like a Facebook infinite scroll and do that kind of, scrolling operation. So we never have a skip. We always basically append at the end. How can we do these two things? Semantic search and these filters.
Yeah, sorry. Is a question, is this relevant to the question or no?
It is. It should have been the next or the third question of my tree. They were basically about the paging, and yeah, this shows exactly the code. In the first get video query handler, you're going to see how I do paging with entity framework, usual skip and take. And the second one, in their get video query handler, this is the same handler or the same method, but going straight to the vector database. And I don't know how to page the second one that goes to the vector database. Open the first of the two right there. And if we go at line 66 and 67 of that, we're going to see essentially the skip and take thing, which then are executed when we fetch the data, right? The other code is the equivalent, but not using entity framework. So if you open the other one, you should see my test, how I'm going using, I believe I used directed semantic memory there or something. Keep going on it. Yeah, you see, okay, in that 43, how to page, I have a kernel memory.search async right there. I can give it the limit, but how do I go to the next page? How do I do this kind of skip and take operations?
I see. That's a good question. I'm not sure. I guess, has this scenario come up for other people in terms of wanting to be able to skip or get the other pages?
Alessandro, out of curiosity, what's your data provider for this? Like where you're storing it? Because you could probably just dependency inject your entity framework or wherever and just do the query manually.
No, I could. As a matter of fact, I have two handlers, one using entity framework and one using semantic memory. And I can also do one that uses both, right? But I didn't know how, kind of like the skip is still something that I don't have available in search async from memory.
Good. So for example, like I kind of ran into a similar problem with semantic memory where it wasn't exposing enough options. So I just dependency inject the search client from the azure.documents.search NuGet package. Do the things I need to do, like the hybrid search that semantic memory doesn't support right now, and then I'll pass it back to semantic memory to handle the rest of the stuff that's already supported. You could probably do a very similar thing in this case. Just replace a couple of lines of logic that you're relying on the memory package for, and then once you're done, you skip over your results, have that result set. You can pass it back to memory or just continue along with whatever your current logic stream is.
I don't think I'm following. So I'm sucking data from YouTube here, and I'm storing in the database, but also in the vector database, right? So when I search for semantic, I mean, it's basically the query at line 45, SRC text is what this thing gets passed. I don't understand how I can use anything else to filter this data in the vector database.
What connector are you using behind the scenes for this memory provider?
I think I'm storing Redis.
Redis, okay. I'm not familiar with Redis, but I would assume there would be some sort of, wherever you're making that Redis connection or the connector to Redis connection, that probably has some sort of like Redis client object, correct? Or something similar?
It could, but I mean, I didn't want to go native because I want to be able to plug them in and out, like, and so going to Weaviate.
Yeah.
So that was my goal, right?
No, I totally get it because I've been trying to do the same thing, but in my experience, the only way kind of around this right now is just, if you have like a Redis client object, let's say, I would just dependency inject that, manually do your result set. Plus, I mean, all this is open source, so it's not the cleanest thing to do, but you could probably go to, wherever the search async method implementation for Redis is, copy that class or extension method for right now and modify it to your needs.
Right, but where I didn't want to add new property, then the semantic kernel wouldn't approve. So it kind of becomes a little involved in the thing. Okay.
I think the or my takeaway is that, connectors, especially for semantic kernel, it's like a frozen snapshot of whatever the functionality that you're trying to bring in is. And for this type of stuff, it does seem like maybe some sort of extension or going beyond what the base original intent of the connector was. So yeah, all this to say is that more advanced scenarios like what you're describing, Alessandro, maybe that's better suited for something like the semantic memory companion
Which
library.
is what I tried to use Friday, and I made it work, right? But the paging doesn't work there either. There is no option for paging there either. Same problem.
Yeah. So I just file this issue there, and then maybe it's a better place to continue that conversation.
Okay, I'll probably go native for the time being. At least seems to be the recommended direction, right? Okay.
Yep. Yeah. The unfortunate thing we want to discourage native code writing, but you probably just have to write native code anyway. Okay, but good question, and hopefully, we can see some progress there. All right, so next several questions. So this one's from Manuel. So Manuel asks about conversational chat agents and examples of memory. I would like to see if you can create agents as in LangChain, and if these agents can have fluid conversations with memory and can perform actions such as making searches. One of the main limitations of LangChain is to be able to request context to the user to perform tasks. So one thing that I will point to is, it's the right repo. GitHub. Oh, yes. Okay, from Craig. Craig created this semantic kernel researcher project that kind of is more closely aligned with like an agent that will go search the web and start trying to fulfill the goal of the research task that you give it. And I believe it is similar to the ask from Manuel here about just having an agent that can, well, this is talking about conversation and chat. So, but I think at the root of it, it's like about how do you make use of memory? How do you like have an agent or planner be able to incorporate the memory and then continue to go off and plan or do its work. So Manuel, I mean, I would take a look at, if you're not aware of this repo from Craig, I'll paste in chat. But yeah, I'd be curious if anyone from the call has been trying something similar. If not, you can discuss this more on Discord if you want, Manuel. Cool. Okay, I'll move on to the next question. So the next one's from Ben about, can you do a more in-depth code review from developer perspective on Chat Copilot, demo how to run / debug everything locally, .NET preferred. I'm having issues to understand how the dots are connected. And for example, just trying to add a native semantic and native function code. Okay. More or less, just the question about walking through it end to end. I would actually point you to. I wish I had this. Okay, so this video here is part 4 of the series that Teresa and myself we filmed around the latest in Chat Copilot. So if you watch episodes 1, 2, and 3 of that does the walkthrough, like literally line by line walkthrough of the Chat Copilot code. Granted, it is an older version of Chat Copilot, but I think the core ideas, core principles are the same. So I guess, Teresa, do you want to maybe add anything here about?
Yeah, is Ben on this call? Because I can walk through some of like the high level files right now. It also might help visualize what you guys were talking about separating the kernels between the planner and like semantic kernel too. So I could just go ahead and do that really quick.
Yeah, if you're here and you have it, let's
Cool.
do it.
Okay, can you guys see my
Let's
screen?
zoom in a bit more.
Okay. So
One more level. Yes.
okay. Yeah, so basically for the way that this is in the Chat Copilot repository. So every time that a chat request comes in, we spin up a new kernel. It's added as a scope service. And you can start in program and then go to the add semantic kernel services. And that's when the kernel is built. And then we register the skills with the kernel. So that is done in this method down here where we add the chat skill, and the chat skill is the one that coordinates the entire bot response request. And then we import the time skill because we just need lifetime. And then I just added this new method where I separated out these semantic skills and native skill registrations. So I have a PR out for that right now. It's in draft, it's a POC, but hopefully that will get merged by the end of today. I'll share that in the chat in a second. But how we do this here is you can specify a directory path for your semantic skills and your native skills in app settings.json, and then we'll just take that path and try to parse out the semantic skills and the native skills from it. So for semantic skills, it's pretty straightforward. We just try to find each of the directory that's in that folder, and then we import it using the SK prompt files and the config file. And then for native skills, this is the code that I just added this morning. It goes through the directory and then it finds every file. And the expectation is that the file name should match the class name, which should match the class type. And then we use reflection to basically instantiate a new skill, and then we import that skill into the kernel. So that's basically how like semantic skills and native skills can be registered with the Chat Copilot kernel. And then they're not invoked automatically. In order to use these skills that have been imported, you either have to call them from one of the methods that's automatically called whenever a chat response comes or chat response request comes in, and that starts in chat skill in chat async. I don't know. Yeah, it starts here. So then if you wanted to do anything, you can intercept one of the methods here to call the skill that you've just imported. Or I've also, in my PR, I've also had it register with the planner directly. So how this works is we have a semantic kernel that manages the bot response generation and all of the requests that come in from the web app. And that includes like the chat async requests, importing documents, etc. But then we have a separate planner instance that coordinates like any additional information that may be needed to fulfill that request. So if you need to call like an extra API, you would register that skill with the planner, and then the planner uses its own kernel to try to orchestrate additional steps. And so if you wanted your skill to like automatically be discovered by the planner for the chat request, then you would register it here. And right now it's calling the same like register custom asyncs or custom skills async method that I just showed you, and it's going to register the same semantic and native skills. And then if it sees that like it will need that function to fulfill the request, like for instance, if I asked Chat Copilot to add 2 numbers, I added this math skill here, it would in theory be able to discover this math skill and then schedule it, send that proposed plan back to the user for approval, and then run it on approval. So that's basically the gist of how you can register skills there. We didn't have that easy of a way to do it before, but you can pull my PR and just add your skills to whatever directory and then list that directory there. But the other option to do it, especially if your plugin needs authentication, is this is the chat controller. So it coordinates all of the chat requests that come in for Chat Copilot. And how we do it from the web app, from the client, is whenever a plugin is enabled on the client, we send a header containing the auth information in the request. For plugins that don't require header, we just have a generic like header with like set to true as the value. But if it does require, like for GitHub, the value of the header is the GitHub hat that is sent through, and then it's registered in this bearer authentication provider. So it's passed in as the value. And the way these providers work, they're passed in through the constructor, and then the constructor saves it as a private class member. And then there's a callback where it's an auth callback within each of the providers that provides, that exposes that authentication value. So then whenever you import the plugin, you can pass in that provider with its authentication callback to the auth callback value. So that goes back to what Neil was asking about earlier. But if you wanted to just like register your skills here, you can do that too. So you can completely like bypass this check that checks to see if the request header has one that's specific to the plugin that you're trying to enable. And then you can just like add this code, like say at the end of this method, to import your skills on every request. So basically every time the kernel is instantiated, because whenever we invoke the kernel, we invoke it in the external information skill. We only invoke the planner if there are functions available in the planner's kernel. So that check is right here. So if there's no native functions or no semantic functions, then we just bail out of this skill completely and never invoke the planner. Yeah, so that's it. You guys have questions there?
Teresa, could you comment a little bit about some of this conversation in the chat about short running or short-lived kernels and how they're supposed to be transient or?
Yeah, so like the kernel can be as lightweight as you want it to be, but like in general, we want it to be transient. So then it basically like handles like whatever you're trying to orchestrate in that moment, and then you can spin up another one. So it's not like long living.
Cool. We have some hands up. Neil, go ahead.
So specifically to that auth provider, how does that like materialize to the user in that's actually doing like the chatting? Is there like a UI that will ask them, hey, can you enter the API key in here, or how would that work?
Yeah, so if you're using, so this is specific to Chat Copilot. So this is not something that's supported by Semantic Kernel, but Chat Copilot is meant to be a reference app. But if you look here, the way that we set it up is the plugins are in this plugin gallery, and then if it needs a authentication value, then it will prompt it for that one. So for GitHub, you just need a personal access token. So we ask it for it here, and then that's going to be saved to the React state and then, or the Redux state, and then sent as the header for the request anytime a request is made whenever this is enabled. For Graph, you can't see that, but for Graph, it would put you through the whole like Microsoft login flow. And then for Jira, this one is asking for like an email and then a personal access token. But then Klarna is an example of one that like doesn't have any authentication, so you can just like enable it. And then whenever you enable it, it will just tag a Klarna header in the request with the value of true.
This is awesome. Thank you. How would we get inside of this list of available plugins?
So if you're planning to add it from the web API, which is like the kernel side, the backend, then you would have to go back to the web app side on Chat Copilot and add that plugin yourself. But you can add it here from this custom plugin. So what we require is the same thing that ChatGPT requires, where you have to enter your domain for your plugin manifest, and then your plugin manifest should contain an open AI definition, and we'll parse that definition in. And let me see, I don't know that I have one in my, okay, yeah, I do have one. I was testing with Instacart, but basically, like, whenever you add this plugin, it will automatically render a card for you. And for Instacart, it doesn't require any kind of authentication. So then you just enable it like you do for Klarna, and then it will tag the header respectively in the request. If this is disabled, that header won't be present in the request. And then if for like some reason Instacart had required a authentication, then that's specified in your manifest plugin. And we only support no auth or user level auth, like the GitHub pat now, but it would automatically generate the right UX for you if you go through and add it this way. And then when you add it this way, it's automatically registered with the planner whenever it hits the web API.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
Isaac, you have your hand up?
Yep. So we talked like in the chat, there was a lot of talk about like semantic kernel being lightweight so that you can just create them and only have them live for short amounts of time. So with that idea, would that mean that you would like a typical flow? Because like you can imagine like a sort of like a chat bot kind of thing where people are asking questions. With a typical flow, do you guys recommend then you create a kernel, register functions to the kernel, and then call the functions and immediately discard the object? Like what's the recommendation here based on this concept of it being transient?
Yeah, what's your use case?
We've got an organization and there's a bunch of different chatbots. Right now, we've got our own custom implementation, but I'd like to switch over to Semantic Kernel because it provides structure. But effectively, you can imagine it's a school. There's 100 different courses taught at the school. And each course is supposed to have its own chatbot that answers questions based on automatically trained course content. And so ideally, everything is sandboxed, which is what we were discussing a couple of minutes ago. And this just brought me the idea. If everything is sandboxed, then how to implement that with this idea of making things lightweight and transient? Like, would you recommend, because these chatbots, they're global with respect to one class. Every single person in the class has the same chatbot, but they're different between classes. So effectively, I want to know, would it be better to keep it alive since everyone shares the same one, or still keep them as temporary things?
Yeah, I would recommend just keeping them as transient because your memory should be like handled elsewhere, like the way that whatever the chatbot, whatever is building, like the context of the chatbot, like the embeddings and stuff are stored somewhere else. So then the approach that we took for Chat Copilot is instantiating a new kernel on every request. And
That's
then
what I want to know. Okay.
Yeah, and then it handles like it has all the functions registered at the beginning of the request, and then it can just discard it after.
Okay. So then a chat bot sort of becomes a question of pull the necessary information for the database that defines the chat bot, create the kernel, which should be the same for everything. All bots are going to be like a class, but they're all going to have their own, and they're all going to have the same kind of fields. So in other words, it's just one flow for every bot. You create a kernel, you register the function since all the bots are pretty much the same, and then that's it. And then theoretically there could be different types of bots which would then have different fields. So that's just me thinking out loud, but thank you, that answers my question.
Yeah, you're right. And so I would recommend the way that you think about it is basically like you basically instantiate this kernel, and then you can specify it like or register which functions are specific to that chatbot that you want for that class, or like
Yeah.
even if you register like a chat skill, and then you can tell it to basically use different personas per chatbot, but it would be still be like one kernel calling it each time.
Oh, thank you, Harrison. John, sorry, that's a really good point. Because they do need to be load balanced at some point. Okay, thank you.
If I may add a comment on this, there might be a situation in which we might want to have two iKernels configured to go to different memory stores, something like that. In this situation, we can use like a named instance, like for the HTTP channel, when we can get a GitHub channel. And so you basically register two iKernel, and then by string, you can get the proper one if you need to make a distinction.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, very good discussion. And John's comment that Isaac thought was good was long-running kernels would hamper your ability to work behind a load balancer. I reinitialize and reload relevant data each request. So for those who are listening to the recording. Cool, very good. We only have 4 minutes left, and we have a lot of other questions to go through. But actually, one last thing, since Lisa from our team commented here. So this is a continuation of Ben's question, which was basically, well, what we discussed. And but Lisa said, so regarding the VS Code extension, which for those who don't know, if you go to VS Code, you can type Semantic Kernel and install an extension that will help you test, your semantic functions inside that. It's kind of a playground sandbox. And there was one thing around custom native functions. I believe there's a video that talks about it. And that is still seems like a experimental feature. So you have to turn that on in the VS Code settings. And yeah, Lisa's saying that, if you want to follow that issue, go here in the chat. And yes, for those who still want to dive deeper into this, please file an issue, and we can iterate some more. Because the VS Code extension is one of the dev tools that we promote for Semantic Kernel. Okay. Well, without doing injustice to some of these other questions, we will reserve them for a future time. But if there's any last minute things that anyone on the call wants to bring up, now's your chance. Otherwise, we can call it a wrap.
Oh, Alessandro, you can go. Oh no, he's saying bye. Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead, Isaac.
I was just wondering. So again, I'm just getting started. I barely even had a chance. I just did one read through of the docs. But so planners, I'm understanding, are registered on a kernel, right? So within planners, because I was suggested Semantic Kernel actually by Microsoft at a meeting. But so within a planner, actually, I think I better just review and ask later. Sorry about that. I need to format my question, and it's just going to take too much time.
That's okay. That's okay. Yeah, feel free to ask on GitHub, Discord, all the main channels. So we can iterate, discuss there. All right. I guess, yeah, last thing is, again, if you want demos or if you have demos to show off, or if you want to even write blogs, right? I guess I didn't really cover this, but we would love more guest content on our blogs. It's actually gotten some good traction and feedback. So for those who want to show off and do deeper dives into what you're doing with the kernel, feel free to use this platform as a way to get your content out there. So if you're interested about this, reach out to me on Discord, and we can set something up. All right. Well, with that, thank you, everybody, and we will talk to you all next time.